Now that we got that metal bracing off and the ductwork, you can see what we're talking about. These tie rod ends, this here is your steering rack, and the tie rod ends is this bar here and this bar here, and they connect here right in the center, right there and there. There's 2 bolts that go through with kind of large heads, and it's got this, they call it a washer. It's got some tangs on it that you bend over to keep the nuts from turning out. So it's a safety device to lock the nuts in place so they won't work out. So we have to take those off, and we will also have to remove the wheels and take off the outer tie rods. But I think we'll do these inner tie rods first before we jack up the car. It's just easier to work on it when the car is a little bit lower. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bend those tabs. There's one on top and one on the bottom, and then turn those nuts out. I probably won't take them all the way out. I'll leave the bolt in a little bit and then we will take off the outer tie rods. So what we got to do here is we have to bend those lock tabs away from that bolt head. And this might not be the easiest thing to do because I don't have enough clearance to really get a bar in there to bend them flat. And this is the tricky part. Everybody else I know that's done it, though, every other video they got her done. So I don't want to be odd man out. So far I'm having absolutely no luck, and I'll probably have to try something else. Okay, like I mentioned before, these bolts that hold these inner tie rod ends on, they call it a washer, but it's basically a piece of metal with some tabs on it. They bend over the edge of this bolt. The bottom one's easy enough to get rid of. You could just take any type of flat iron bar and just pound down on it with a hammer. But the top one is kind of tricky to unbend, and I still have to do this one. I've already gotten this one unbent. I'll show you how I did it. If you take a regular auto body, old school auto body slide hammer, and you take out the sheet metal screw, I was lucky enough that mine had 1/4-inch threads, and I just put a heavy piece of steel with a hole in it, put that in my slide hammer. I hooked that underneath that tab, and it pulled her right up. I'll try and do it on camera here. We'll try videoing it. You may or may not be able to see it, but if you don't have an auto body slide hammer, they are cheap enough at a discount auto parts store. You can get one. Well, this is how I did it. So let's see if it'll work again. This is the harder side because I got more stuff in the way. But so what I did is I put my piece of metal that I bolted by slide hammer, and like that. This side was harder than the other side. Let me try and get it from, I got it the tiniest bit. Let me try for the other side. All right, so if I can get that piece of metal underneath that tab, okay, I got it bent up enough. Now I gotta see if using the pliers can straighten it. Fortunately, this side's got more clearance to put the pliers in. Oh yeah. There we go. I think I almost got her. There we go. Okay, now that should be bent up enough for me to get a wrench on it. We will find out. All right, sports fans. Before we get going here again, I just want to recap on some of the main things that I think someone watching a how-to video on this would like to know about. The first thing is on this washer here, right here with the tabs that go on the flat side of those bolts. We found the best way to take that off was to put a slide hammer and just bend it up that way with a slide hammer. This is a cheap auto body slide hammer. You can get these from any auto parts store. They're really cheap. And then we just put a piece of steel on the end to put a bolt through it. That works really good for bending those tabs on that washer up. The other thing I want to talk about is, and the video that Shade Tree Fix-It Man made, he suggested this, and as far as I'm concerned, this is the only way to do it. You got to take a socket. I used a 7/8. That's basically the same size as a 22 millimeter. I had a spare 7/8 socket. I just cut it with my chop saw, cut about 1/2 inch off it. 3/4 if you include the blade curve. 1/2 inch was a piece of waste stock I had. So somewhere around 1/2, about that much anyway. I didn't cut it perfectly square, but that didn't seem to matter. It worked quite well. And then here's the other thing. We were particularly lucky here with this car in that none of the bolts holding this one top bracing bar, this piece here, none of those bolts were rusted bad enough that we couldn't easily remove them. They go through here and through here. And on Shade Tree Fix-It Man's video, he broke 3 out of 4 of these bolts right here. I'm going to show you. If those bolts aren't coming easy for you, I'm going to show you something. You can actually get to them from the bottom and spray some WD-40 or penetrating oil on it. If you take the camera, look underneath there, you'll see this light. I'm going to flash a light here, and I'm going to have my cameraman kind of focus on that. It's right behind the spring there, if you can see it. Can you see the beam of light coming down? So we're doing this, so you can see the hole. And there's also one on the back side. If you look around the back side of the spring, it's the same thing. So if you're having a hard time turning those bolts up on top near the shock tower that hold that one crossbar on, you can spray some penetrating oil on them, and that will probably make them come loose. These bolts right here, they weren't quite as easy to get at. You'd have to remove the fender liner to get to these. But from what I've seen, the problems that people had are on these ones, on either side. So there is a way to spray penetrating oil on those threads. Once you take the wheels off the car, spray some penetrating oil from the bottom so you're less likely to break those bolts coming off. One other thing, I have found that it's easier to get to these bolts that hold the tie rod ends on if you turn your wheels all the way to the right, like you're making a hard right-hand turn. Turn them all the way and then lock your ignition column, and that'll keep them in place. And it's much easier to work on this with these bolts over here. If it was turned to the left, they'd be way over there. So that'll help you a little bit. All right, sports fans, here we go. I have a situation here where the 15 doesn't work. It's too small. The 17's too big, and my socket kit doesn't have a 16 millimeter socket. A lot of my socket sets don't have 16 millimeters. That's kind of odd, but it looks to me like a 5/8 fits on there really nice. So I'm going to use a 5/8. I'm also going to spray a little penetrating oil on here. Now, the bottom of this tie rod stud here has got a hex head on it. So you could hold that with a wrench to keep that from spinning, because if you just use a regular ratchet wrench on here, or a regular wrench, there's a good chance that this tie rod end is just going to spin there in place and you won't be able to get that nut off. However, like I said before, impact wrenches are good for more than just taking off tight nuts. They are also good for taking off a nut where it would normally spin. So we'll just see how the impact wrench does on this. Another good tip for you, when you use, make sure you check what direction your impact wrench is going before you use it. Make sure you have a reverse if you need a reverse, or forward if you need to use forward. Sometimes it can really screw you up if you try to make it go the wrong way by accident. Now here's got another situation. I actually need a deep socket here because there's not enough clearance. When the male part of that impact wrench is stuck in the female part of the socket, there's not enough clearance for the socket to cover the nut. So you can cheat a lot of times by putting on your socket first. Okay, and let me make sure I got it on here. There we go. Now, and then putting your, this even works with the ratchet wrench, then putting your wrench on next, because that way that bolt can stick through further. And if you just have your wrench to put in the socket only just a little bit that far, it'll probably work. So let you have the advantage of a deep well socket with a standard socket quite often. Let's see if we get away with it. I'm going to put this on reverse here and see what happens. There we go, we got her. Now, we're putting a new tie rod on this car, a new tie rod end. So we do not have to worry about boogering up this tie rod stud here on this tie rod end. However, it might be worth talking about what to do if you don't want to mess it up. Number of things you can do. You can put your nut back on a certain amount, and then a lot of times you can pound up from the bottom and pound that tie rod out. I'm just going to show you this for the sake of, if you wanted to take something apart and with the intent of saving it, we're replacing it, but if you did want to save this, you put the nut on a little bit so you don't mess up the threads. And then a lot of times you can pound right up on it and that'll make it come off. The other thing, a lot of times you can just whack right here and that'll distort. That's a tapered fit. So this shaft tapers in there, and there's a taper on that arm there. A lot of times you just whack it right here, it'll make it pop loose. See? That's all that took. And let's see what you got there now. You see how that's spinning? The whole deal? A lot of times you push down on it into the taper. See, that'll work. And then it's so loose that you can just tap it. But if you're in a situation where you wanted to remove that tie rod, that's how you do it without boogering it up. We were actually in a situation where I could have just hammered away on this. Now, what shape is it in? Actually, I don't think it's too bad. I don't think that's too bad. But it was only 60 bucks for the kit, and we ordered the kit before we started the repair because time was of the essence. We couldn't wait for a kit. Once we tore this car apart, we need to get back on the road, so we figured we'd spend the 60 bucks and put new regardless. So that's what we had going on there. So now we will take off the inside. We'll take this tie rod all the way out and we'll see what it looks like. Alright, sports fans, now we're going to take the tie rod off on the passenger side. And I know you've already seen the driver's side, but I showed you the hillbilly way of removing it. Now I'm going to show you the proper way to do it. First we have to get the dog out of the way. If you have a dog in your way, get him out of the way. That's step one. Step two, put a little penetrating oil on it. So far everything's the same as last time, isn't it? Step three, put your socket on it. I gotta go get a hammer. Now I'm gonna put the socket on first because once again that stud is so long. If I already had the impact wrench on it, there wouldn't be clearance to reach the nut. Now I could use a deep well socket, but the deep well sockets are all the way over in the toolbox, and the toolbox is like 5 feet away. So I just didn't want to bother with that. So let's put the impact wrench on her, and we will remove this nut. Make sure it's on reverse. Okay, we have a situation here where the whole shebang is spinning. Okay? So what I have to do is I'm going to have to hold that stud, and I'm going to have to turn this nut because the whole ball wax is spinning. Okay? Now this nut here was a 16 millimeter, and I don't have any 16 millimeters. Okay? So I'm using a 5/8, which really actually fits pretty good. The bottom is some small size that I didn't want to look for, so I'm using vice grips. Hope that isn't just slipping. Let's see if it is. I think it is. We got our maid though on this because we can do anything here. It's loose. We can just cut it off with a torch if we have to. So. Boy, that is interesting that is so tight on there. That's very interesting. I wasn't really expecting this. You might think, well, maybe I shouldn't use vice grips. Well, even if I was using a wrench on that, it still would have slipped. Jesus. I really didn't expect this. I didn't expect this to be this tight. I'm going to heat that up with a torch because I do not have to worry about ruining anything on there. She doesn't want to come. Okay, sports fans, remember how I told you never ever heat anything up with a torch when you used acetone and ATF on it? Well, there comes a time when I break every safety rule, including my own. We didn't put that much on. We'll see how much flames it makes. Okay, we'll just heat that nut up. If we were trying to save this tie rod end, I'd be kind of concerned here, but I'm not trying to save it. So I don't have to worry about melting that boot or anything. Look how much nicer that heats than when I'm lazy and I'm too lazy to put on a heating tip. I just use my torch cutting tip. That heats a hell of a lot nicer than a torch tip. Let's see if she comes off now. Oh yeah, she's coming. Starting to complain though. Starting to complain. She doesn't want to come. Putting up a fuss. Might have to heat it some more. Yep. I'm gonna have to put her. Got her pretty far. Oh, that's so much nicer than using a cutting tip. There we go. Now that's hot, I can't touch it with my fingers. Is the whole thing spinning? Is that what's going on? Okay, I'm gonna let that cool down a little bit. I'll go shut the torch off. I don't want to forget about it. I always shut my torch off whenever I get done using it. Even if I think I'm gonna use it again fairly soon. Because the oxygen and accelerator tanks are kind of expensive. So there's no sense in taking the chance. And also, it's just safe to have the torch turned off. So, turn that thing off, back out my regulators, And now we don't have to worry about anything bad happening. Is this coming off or is it not coming off? I think I'd really do much good to put penetrating oil on it. Except for it might cool it down some. Let's see if it's going to come. Here it is. There we go. How hot do you think that is? Had it red hot only moments ago. Should I touch it with my fingers?
No.
Okay. Let's see here. All right, that's off. Now, this is probably loose because it was spinning. See? Now, I wanted to show you folks something. I was going to show you how to use this tie rod end puller, but this side was loose to begin with. However, I got a funny story. This here is a tie rod end puller, and I'll show you about how it works. We go like this, and that goes on over there, and then this screws up against that stud, and I'll just, as you see, pushing that up through there, that pops that off. But in this case, we didn't need to use it. But I got a funny story that goes with this. I bought this once just because I thought I should have one. Good, you know, keep a well-stocked shop. And then I needed to use one. And I forgot that I bought this one. So I bought another one. And when I got home to use it, for some reason I had a sneaking suspicion that I already owned one. And I looked in the most logical place that I would have put it. And there it was, still in the box. So, I have number 2 tool that I bought still in the box. I probably bought this about 10 years ago. And look at that, it's Napa, but it's made in Taiwan. So that's the deal there. When you buy a tool, you should remember that you purchased it. I guess that's the moral of that story. Okay, we got this tie rod end off. Now let's take off our inner tie rod. Let's see if I can pull this thing out. There she is. Now we'll lay this on the ground and we'll compare it to our new parts.